we're excited to team up with Sheila Shaffie from ProcessArc to provide you and your bank with some necessary information and tools to get your journey started. If you have any questions during the session, we have a Q&A button at the top. So we have limited time this morning, so let's get started. Sheila, take it away.
Thank you, Paul. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining the discussion this morning. I know the topic of intelligent automation is rather a hot one and has been for some time, but I think the challenge I think we all face in corporations and banks is that it's really an ever-evolving topic. And there's a lot of noise, a lot of jargon surrounding the space, which makes it a bit confusing. So what we're hoping to do with these webinar series is to provide you with as much tangible information as possible to declutter the insights and information that's out there so that you can begin to think about, if you haven't done so already, begin to think about an intelligent automation strategy for your organization. And if you have already started down that path, perhaps some of the case studies that we'll be sharing with you in these webinar series will give you additional information or help that you may be seeking. This one in particular, today's discussion is really, I would think of as a foundational conversation. We are here to talk about some of the most fundamental concepts that define intelligent automation, some of the most fundamental tools that you will be probably using on a repeated basis from an automation perspective. And then I will jump into a case study. So think of this one as kind of like a course 101 on intelligent automation. And with each subsequent webinar, we will keep building on these ideas. So again, you get a sense of breadth and depth around this concept. So we just very briefly discussed on the objectives. Really today, if you walk away feeling like I have a better sense of what intelligent automation is and what the key tools are, and I have a sense of how I can apply some of these tools, I would consider that a significant win. And again, like Paul mentioned, please feel free to put your questions along the way, because I'm sure if you're thinking of it, there are others that are thinking it as well. Just a brief background on myself so that you feel comfortable that you are indeed in good hands. I'm one of the original founders of ProcessArc. We've been around for over 2 decades, and most of our clients are actually in the banking sector. And we get involved with our clients either because they want to re-engineer their business practices so that they can improve client experience, or they are interested in automation. So we are quite well versed in this space. We know what your typical challenges are. We know what your system limitations are. So happy to provide insight whenever you feel the need to ask questions. So let's start with this notion of digital transformation and why you, again, if you haven't considered automation, why you may want to start thinking about it. Now, digital transformation was kind of like the big umbrella, the catch-all for anything that you may be doing in the bank to help elevate its performance. Now, when we interviewed a series of banks, 69% came back and said, we are considering digital transformation. And the number one reason they were thinking about doing it had to do with building efficiency within the organization, obviously. And the second top reason had to do with improved client experience. And you can kind of imagine why those two things kind of go hand in hand, because if you improve the performance of the process, if you take the inefficiency and the redundancies out, inherent in that, you should technically be improving the experience of your end customer. So digital transformation, or in our world, in today's conversation, intelligent automation, is really a foundational strategy around client experience and operational efficiency. Now, the ultimate goal, if you think about intelligent automation, what it's really trying to do is free up capacity in your organization. It's trying to take over some of the tasks that are being done by humans. Not that we think they don't add value, but these are tasks that people do because there are most often system limitations. Think about your Fiserv core platform. It's as good as it's going to get. We do a lot of additional manual steps in the process because the system can't perform those tasks. So automation is really around opening up capacity and speeding up the process. And how it does that, this is kind of like the secret sauce of what makes intelligent automation initiatives successful, is the combination of knowing which tool to use and where to use that tool in the process in order to make it its best version. And the only way you will be able to get here is, unfortunately, by just practice. So it's by understanding what's available to you and putting those ideas into practice, those automation tools into practice, that you will start to learn exactly what will make sense at what point in time. It's very much like building Legos. So the more you understand how each pieces come together, the more efficient you will become over time. Now, let's talk about why you may want to consider automation. What are some of the significant benefits that you should anticipate attaining when you begin to automate your business practices? Now, I put them all up at the same time because I'm not going to review every single one of them. I will share this presentation with you so you can peruse through it at your convenience. But when I think about automation, I think about the top reasons or the top benefits that I'm hoping our clients attain. The number one reason is really around cost savings. When you start applying robotics, optical character recognition, machine learning tools within a process, you are taking the human effort out of that process. So naturally, you're becoming more cost effective at completing transactions. The great thing about automation is that it doesn't care what Fiserv core you're using, what your architecture, your technology architecture looks like. It's really a GUI platform that sits on top of your existing infrastructure. So it's not going to require you to switch out anything or convert in or out of any systems. It's really code and application that allows the systems to work more effectively with one another. So that's why there's a huge ability to cover every single space and every single area within the business. The other things that you should expect to gain from it is that because it's robotics, because it's automation, these processes can run 24/7. So it doesn't have to be bound by when your resources are necessarily available in the branch or in the home office. So again, feel free to go over these at your leisure, but just conceptually understand that automation is really, again, about speeding up a process, taking over the human action in specific parts of the process so that you can do it more effectively, you can reduce the probability of the mistake and risks that are associated with our banking practices. Now, intelligent automation is not one thing. It's actually dependent on three separate things. So let me just explain it very quickly here. So the three components that ultimately define what the industry calls intelligent automation is, first, artificial intelligence, and I will explain what that is, and I'll give you examples. The second thing is the concept around business process management, and ultimately robotics, which is RPA, and some people may just call them bots. Of the three components, if you were to ask me which one of them would probably cause the most amount of risk or failure associated with automation, I would almost always tell you it's number two, because most people that deploy automation overlook this idea that you don't want, just because you can automate a process, it doesn't mean that you should do it. You first have to understand how that business process works, how account opening really works, how wire transfers really work, why we do things the way we do. You want to re-engineer that process to look like its best version, and then enable that process using either artificial intelligence tools or robotics tools to get it to work the way you had envisioned it. So there's a lot of architecture work, process architecture work that needs to happen before any of the automation tools actually get deployed. Now, let's talk about robotics, because that is probably the most foundational piece around automation. It's the first stepping stone in the realm of automation. So you can use a plethora of automation capabilities out there. You could use Microsoft, you could use UiPath, Automation Anywhere. The only difference between these vendors ultimately is not their capability, it's just their cost structure. But robotics at its core, it's simply code. It's just code that we write so that it can take over repetitive tasks. And so it is something that sits on top of your existing processes. Think about every time you may be entering data in a particular Excel spreadsheet, reports that you may be generating, anything that's systematic, that's repetitive, that has a lot of logic associated with it, is where robotics can come into play. And like I mentioned, it's simply code, and you can use various automation capabilities to do the RPA. And in our third webinar, we'll talk specifically about the Microsoft Power Platform capabilities that could deliver this, and what it isn't, which is, it may seem silly at this point in time, but there was a point where people actually thought robotics or bots were actually the kind of bots that you would see in a manufacturing plant that weld things or move things along in a conveyor belt. There's nothing that exists physically when we're talking about robotics, and it's certainly not artificial intelligence. They are very different things. And I will explain what artificial intelligence is so you can kind of begin to see that, hey, robotics is just code that takes over repetitive tasks. It's not doing any of the critical thinking or any of the cognitive skills that humans have. Artificial intelligence is exactly the opposite of that. It's beginning to take over human thinking. Now, I kind of touched on these topics very quickly, but if you were thinking to yourself, hey, I want to play with robotics a little bit, where should I start? What makes a process a great candidate for robotics? Well, I've given you the criteria. The most basic ones is that you want to make sure the process is repetitive, that it does exactly the same thing all the time. There should be significant volume in there, so don't automate a process or apply robotics on something that you do 5 times a day that takes 5 minutes. Robotics really makes sense when there is volume around the transactions, and that this concept of a rule base that I have here just means that, because remember, I mentioned that robotics can't think, bots cannot think on their own. You want to pick a process that you can very specifically define the logic and the steps that it takes to complete something. So an example of robotics that we recently applied had to do with product change requests that come from the branch to the back office. So these would be DDA, product or fee changes, that requests that are coming from a banker or a teller in the front. That is something that is very systematic. We know for every type of an account what the specific code is, what the specific fees are, and by filling out a very simple request form, the robot can say, oh, account ABC that belongs to Sheila is this type of a product, and I need to change it to this type of a product. And the bot will do all of that for you and make all the changes in Premiere. Because there's no, again, real thinking involved there, a robot can take over that request. And here's, again, further examples of items that you can go back and think about that would be perfect for robotics. Anytime you're thinking about copying and pasting information from one place to another, every time you have to take a file from an email and store it to a specific place, generating a report, think about onboarding. Every time we onboard, there's a specific set of activities. There's specific communications that get set out to maybe HR, maybe to the IT department. All of that can now be done essentially with a bot if we can tell it what to do. Now, let's go into the world of artificial intelligence, because that's probably the heavier hitting set of tools, the more complicated strategy. if you decide to go down the path of automation. So think about artificial intelligence as smart machines. These are algorithms. They're statistical models that use unbelievable amount of data ultimately to predict what's going to happen next. It's really a way of trying to simulate human thinking, human logic. That's what artificial intelligence is all about. And as I mentioned, most of the world of AI is data centric. So looking at historical information to predict, again, what may be coming up next. So by definition, I think what makes implementation of artificial intelligence in banks challenging, to say the least, is that while we have tons of data in banks, we have done sort of a disservice in terms of the quality of the data we have been storing and how well we've structured that data. And I know we have business analytics as a data module that comes out of Premier, but I think the toughest thing that we have encountered thus far is even trying to make sense of the data that is in business analytics so that we can use the data to do what would seem like simple things, like predicting which borrower may be paying off early or which borrower may be at a higher risk of default or a late payment. So these would be examples of us using artificial intelligence to help a bank mitigate against risk. But the challenge we have is getting the data in a way that we could push it through into an algorithm so that it can predict what we want it to predict. Now, these are some of the central tenets or tools around artificial intelligence. So you've got optical character recognition, natural language processing, chatbots, and machine learning. Because remember, the whole point of artificial intelligence is trying to mimic human thinking, human speech, humans' ability to be able to see, visualize, and comprehend the intent of text, which is why the world of artificial intelligence is so vast and ever evolving. But the number one and number two tools that we consistently use, and you will consistently use when it comes to automation of processes, the first one is the optical character recognition one, and the second is machine learning. I would say machine learning is kind of a later one in terms of evolution of automation, but optical character recognition is one that you may be using right out of the gate. And OCR is essentially the ability to take data off of any kind of form or a document and being able to make it structured so a robot can use it to make decisions, not make decisions that a robot can take to be able to do the tasks you want it to do. So think about a wire transfer request. Right now, some of you may be using forms, but optical character recognition essentially allows you to, even if you decided to keep the form as is or keep it in a PDF format, the minute you save that document with all the customer information, the amount you want to wire, the account, all the information that's on there, optical character recognition can essentially look at that form and extract all the relevant data that you've told it you want to extract from it. So it takes it, it structures it in a way that now you can say account A, extract $20,000, send it to this routing number, this account number at this address, and that data gets extracted and gets populated in whatever your wire transfer module may be. So optical character recognition, by its definition, has a huge application in the banking sector because unfortunately we're still riddled and we're still dealing with a lot of paper and form that essentially is needed to be able to initiate the processing in the branch or in the back office. So for us, from an automation perspective, robotics is always in the game for us. The second tool that we use most often is optical character recognition, and the third one is machine learning. So then again, we're using the concept of data to help us make decisions within the bank. I know I'm probably throwing a lot at you, and hopefully some of it is repeat. If it's not, just ask questions. I'm here for you. Send an email to myself or Paul, and we'll provide whatever additional information it is that we have. But again, if you take away some of the more fundamental concepts around automation, I would say we're doing great. Now, machine learning, very quickly, I know there's a lot of, again, energy and noise around this particular idea, but it is something that is, in my opinion, considered to be one of the more sophisticated tools. And the reason is that the intent of machine learning is to be able to teach algorithms how to think like a human, how to make decisions like a human. So they take quite a bit of time and effort to actually what we call train. So train the model to be able to read information and be able to make a determination of what to do next. And like I mentioned earlier on, the biggest challenge we have with machine learning is just the lack of reliable data. So if you're thinking, hey, we want to leverage machine learning at some point in time in our bank to be able to detect risk, to be able to make better business decisions in terms of what products to offer to a particular client based on their profile, or which loans or accounts are at risk, then you should be already thinking about a data strategy of exactly what data you think you may need, creating data lakes or creating tables in the cloud so that you can easily access them and that they're structured. So I don't want you to give up on the idea of machine learning. I just want you to be aware of the fact that this is not a tool that you can leverage right out of the gate with automation unless you've already have a data strategy in place that's cleaned up everything for you. So think about the thing with machine learning is there are companies that are way ahead of the curve with it. We use it on a daily basis. It just hasn't quite made its way into the world of banking yet. So think about image recognition, speech recognition, text generation and analysis, algorithm recommendations. Every time you go into YouTube or Netflix, they're always recommending something for you to watch. It's because they're collecting data about you. And with that data, they're making predictions about what your preference, based on your preferences, what you may anticipate to watch next. So it's certainly in our everyday life. It's just that some of these companies already started their journey with the data and then leveraged automation to be able to take it to the next level, their services and products to the next level. Okay, we've got 5 minutes, so I'm going to get through the application of banking. So this particular example, I'm actually going to take you through in the next webinar. So if it's not crystal clear to you, do not panic, do not worry. I'm going to go through the commercial lending process next. And the reason I've picked this particular one is because it's a common process in all of our banks. It lacks elegance, it lacks efficiency. Most often, it's almost always manual. Even though we have systems in place, there's still people touching the process along the way. And currently, we typically go through these specific milestones. I didn't take you through the whole life cycle in this presentation, but in the next one in December, we will do that. But if you think about the milestones of data collection, data entry, issuing a term sheet or a proposal, and then doing the full-blown underwriting, that entire process is typically in banks reliant on Excel spreadsheets, manual data entry, manual data compilation or file compilation. In the world of robotics, it's going to look totally different because instead of sending emails and collecting files and emails, you can create hyper apps. You can create user interfaces where a loan officer or even the customer can start populating some of that data and attaching the documentation that you request from them so that it comes to you seamlessly, either into your workflow system or into a standard queue. Then we could use optical character recognition and artificial intelligence to extract the data that we need out of those forms, out of those documents, and populate them into your Excel spreadsheets or whatever tools that you're using to do your spreads and analysis. Once the analysis is completed, you would use robotics and artificial intelligence now to generate an accurate term sheet that is standard, that has the same look and feel that you want to represent your bank. And then ultimately, once the term sheet is accepted, the data would automatically flow. All the data that we scraped in the data compilation stage to populate the analysis tools that you have in order to do the documentation that you need for the proposal or the opportunity memo, whatever your process is. The point being that in order to automate processes, you can begin to see that it's not just one tool or it's one step that we're automating. In order to do automation of a process, you will need a combination of tools at very different points in order to take the data, the information, the requests from one stage to another. And again, I will take you through a much deeper level analysis showing you the before picture and the after picture of a commercial lending process that we just completed for a client. So you will begin to get a sense for exactly what they were doing before, where their constraint points were, and how we alleviated those with automation. Okay. So here's, again, I'm giving you guys a summary of all the areas that we historically and repeatedly hit with automation. So you'll know mortgage origination, client onboarding, knowing your customer, anti-money laundering, wire transfers even are places that we consistently go to for automation opportunities. And again, I've included one more case study, but unfortunately we're running out of time. But again, take your time going through it. This has to do with just emails coming into a central repository and having to be disseminated to various departments so that actions can be taken. And you can read about how we automated this process. And then ultimately, just remember that automation is really about robotics and AI tools. You will need to examine your business processes before you automate them. And just because you can automate something, it doesn't mean you should. You have to start by picking the right process and learning about how to apply the right tools at the right places. So these are the next set of webinars that are coming up. That's it. That's it for it. For me, I'm grateful. Now, I'm not sure if, thank you, Paul. I'm not sure if there's any questions. So
yeah, if you have any questions, please ask them now, or you can also email us later. But the presentations will be on our website along with the video.
any questions from anyone? Yes.
Yeah, I have, Sheila, what would be the best way to get started with automation?
Well, I would probably pick, because I believe in proof of concept. Pick a process that has high volume, has an impact to your customers. Think about, again, wire transfers as an example, product change. These are high volume, high impact transactions, and start with those. So make sure you give yourself time to play with the tools, learn them, and if you can't, there's always technology partners that you can leverage to do that. But start your journey with automation with a proof of concept, again, to learn what it's going to take to actually automate processes, because it's not as easy as some companies may let you believe.
Any other questions for Sheila?
Yes, Sheila. I said there's a lot of automation companies out there. Is there one that you would recommend, or would that be you?
Great question. I'll tell you our go-to platform. Like I mentioned, there's been so much, this world has evolved so quickly. 5 or 6 years ago, UiPath and Automation Anywhere totally dominated the marketplace. And they charged a pretty penny. Like, you couldn't start automating a process for less than $30,000 to $40,000 in just licensing fees. Now, our go-to platform is the Microsoft Power Automate. They're inexpensive, and I think they're charging incredibly low prices as a way to get into the market. So that's what we're using. That's what we recommend to our clients because it's so inexpensive. It allows you to learn and make mistakes and not feel like, oh my gosh, I just spent $50,000 onboarding an automation platform and I don't quite know what to do with it. So, I mean, I think most banks are Microsoft, they use the Microsoft platform. So getting the incremental licenses for the Power Automate should not take a lot of effort. And it follows the same security protocols that you would need to have in place. So they've really thought through it well. So for a few $1,000s, instead of $30,000 to $40,000, you can start playing with automation.
Well, I appreciate everybody's time today. If there's no other questions, we'll let you get back to your day and we will talk to you next month.
Thank
Thanks,
you for
everyone.
coming. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Sheila.
Thank you.
Thank you.